this started. Thank you very much for your patience. And I, for one, am very excited for this opportunity. I don't know that in the many years that I've been following city government that I've seen the commission and one of our boards come together like this. So I think it's a really unique opportunity for us to look at the future of Treasure Island together. And I thank you all for being willing to do that. And I want to make sure that it's clear that our intention in bringing these two together and us getting involved this early on in the process was not to trample on your abilities as LPA members. We have full trust in your abilities, and we have made the appointments to your board because we do trust you, and we trust your skill set and knowledge and your opinions on these very important matters moving forward for our city. But we felt it was beneficial for us to come together beforehand so that we are all moving in the right direction, since this does have to come to the commission eventually. We figured it would be good to get us all on the same page from the very beginning, and then we don't have to waste time if there's potentially any disagreements on the back end. So get ahead of it, and I'm really excited to hear your perspectives and hear the perspectives of our city commission, and I'll share in our ideas. So thank you all for being here, and I'll turn it over to our city manager to further introduce what we're going to be doing tonight.
Well, I thank you too for everyone coming together, and good evening. It's a milestone for our city to update, completely rewrite the comp plan, so this is a really big moment for us. I did want to put out there, just to get it out of the way, that we will not be talking about heightened density. Our community spoke loud and clear almost 4 years ago, so everything else in the comp plan except for those two issues are to be updated at your will. So thank you again for your effort and for all the time you're putting in tonight. It's very, very much appreciated. We have hired the Cordino consultants to help us write our EAR, the Evaluation Appraisal Report, which is done. And then we're subsequently now going through the comp plan, and then they will be on board with us to rewrite our land development regulation. And so with that, we have Scarlett Hammond, who is our project manager, standing behind me. And so I just wanted to introduce her officially. We also have Joe Cordino virtually online. He's the president of the company, and these two, you're in very good hands to walk us through this process. I'd also would like to introduce our staff, who very much supports them on the back end, is also spending a lot of time on this project, so it's an endeavor by all. We have Kathy Gadamer, our Community Development Department Director, and then Catherine Yonkin, our Assistant Community Development Director, and she is the project manager on the staff end for this project. So with that, welcome, and thank you.
Hello, good evening. Scarlett Hammonds with the Cordino Group. And just wanted to say I'm very happy to be here. I'm going to go through a little bit about how we're going to run the workshop. I am co-facilitating tonight with Joe Cordino, who is attending virtually. He couldn't be here in person, but he is still participating. We're going to talk more about the issues and concerns of the city versus in the past. When you've seen me before, we've kind of laid it out element by element and talked about what it's about and how we address the issues in each element. And we're going to focus more about just the actual issues and kind of get away from talking about the elements. We'll definitely get back to that further on in the process, but this is more about getting discussion going and getting some policy direction from you all. And I'm gonna talk a little bit about. I'll do some introduction, a little bit about what a comprehensive plan is again, just to refresh you, and talk a little bit about just briefly what the issues are. Then we'll go into to bringing up the issues. We'll talk through, and
this
and we've got
conference will now be recorded.
Points that and then we'll open it up for discussion based on the issues and how we see them. And But first of all, I wanted to give Joe a moment to introduce himself. And Joe, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having us. I apologize I can't be there in person, but it's good to see you all and get to know you a little bit. We're really excited to do this project. Scarlett's going to go through the presentation, but I just wanted to start off by saying that we held a couple of workshops in early December, and they went really well. They were super well attended. The commentary was great. It was insightful. It was respectful. You usually don't get that type of turnout, particularly at that time of the year. And so I think we're off to a great start. A lot of cities don't tackle rewriting their comprehensive plans as thoroughly as you're doing it right now. So it's a great challenge, but I think you're going to benefit from it as you go forward in the year. So I'll be here to help facilitate and answer any questions. I'll get it back to Scarlett. And again, thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you. And we'd like the next slide, please. So I'll start with what we've done so far, kind of briefly give you a recap. Previously, of course, we had done the evaluation, and that we called the EAR, and we came up with the recommendations of what the amendments should be. We brought those to you, both boards, in workshops and hearings, and got that finished with. So then we that was all kind of to set us up for the next steps, which is what we're doing now. So we have had multiple meetings with city staff to get that institutional knowledge and the newer information, the new plans that are out there, just the background and information that is very important for us to understand more about how Treasure Island is different from other cities, and the information that's going to help us with putting together the policies and the updates. Additionally, we've been collecting our own data, reaching out to other sources such as the census, getting statistics such as user rates, and just basic data that we need to inform how we move forward and kind of where we are right now versus 20 years ago. We've had, again, 2 community visioning workshops that happened last month, and where we heard a lot of information from and a lot of input from the residents, and we're going to go through some of that tonight as we go through these issues. And we've set up a project website, and in that I wanted to say that we've got, we're able to collect input, comments, and questions from the community through an email that we have through that website. We've reviewed state legislative changes and made those recommendations of how we can come up to date and make sure that you're still within the law. And the LPA has already we've had done some changes to the comp plan elements to show you what those changes are specifically, how it's written out to address those changes from the state legislative perspective, and we have brought those to a workshop to the LPA. We have drafted a whole entire new element, the property rights element, and the LPA has also seen that. And we continue to work directly with city staff, getting specific edits directly from them, and they're doing that in track changes so that we know who on the city staff is making the changes and what those are exactly. And we've adopted city policies such as the strategic plan and several others. Next slide. So what we're going to do going forward, we're going to have a number of these visioning sessions, however many it takes. It could be 2 to 3, kind of depending on how we're going through these. And then the next one is coming up in early February, and then following on February 10th. Then that will wrap up pretty much our visioning exercises for this phase of the program. Next, we'll draft changes to the plan. This will be the actual detailed writing of those changes. And we'll incorporate, again, everything that I just mentioned in the slide before will be incorporated of how we're going to draft those changes, and including all the comments that we've received through all the visioning workshops and all of the data and analysis. And that will go to the LPA in February and March. and then that will be seeking additional comments in those meetings on the actual draft changes, and we will then present that to the City Commission. Next slide. So I just wanted to go again through the elements of what make up a comprehensive plan. Its goals, objectives, and policies. And our goals are really our value statements, the overriding kind of vision, if you will, of each element has goals. Sometimes an element will only have one, but sometimes it's necessary to have additional goals, whatever is appropriate in that. They are not necessarily measurable, but they should include purpose, scope, and context. Under the goals, we have a number of objectives, and these are getting to more specific information of how that goal can be implemented. These are measurable and with statements of a desired end. We'll come up with the measurable, we'll have, what do we call it? A way to measure it is under each objective. It'll be described. These should include location, character, and timing. Then we go to the more action statements, and those are the policies. These indicate how the goal, these again support how the goal and objectives would be implemented. And these should include principles, agreements, regulations, and under regulations, we're going to include our land development regulations and resolutions. So goals, objectives, and policies are really based on local information, and that's why it's really important that we do all of our background research and talk to the community, talk to elected officials and the planning board, and understand what your local information is. Every plan is unique to the needs of the vision of the community. So we may look at other comprehensive plans for guidance. Kind of just some newer technology comes out, and hey, how did another city address that? Things like that. But then we'll modify that to make sure that it's specific to Treasure Island's needs. We also know that information will evolve over time. And again, that's why it's very important to keep updated on the most recent data that we have available to us. And then the input we receive from the various sources is used to make these changes, such as the public comments and the studies that have just recently been done. And we also have input, can be statistics, regional trends, new technology, other planning studies, institutional knowledge, and future desires of the city. So next slide. So again, tonight is more about getting policy direction. It's more about a discussion amongst you, facilitated by myself and Joe. But we want to know, we want to discuss the local topics of concern and how they can be addressed in the comprehensive plan. And we don't have to get into the actual addressing them in the comprehensive plan tonight, but more about that could come into future workshops after we hear back from you in the discussion and what you are thinking, and then we'll take our expertise of what we've done in other cities and bring that to you and say, hey, this is how we can address this, and this is the changes that we need to make, and here's where we'll do it. And we also handed out a matrix tonight, if you have that in your package. That is kind of to illustrate that there are the issues that are on the left-hand side of the matrix, and it's showing you where in a comprehensive plan these issues can be addressed, or usually are. So. And you'll see that not always is it just one issue in one place. So it'll cross-reference. That's how comprehensive plans are. It's designed to be that way. We can deal with topics in a number of different locations within the comprehensive plan. So yeah, we're basically tonight we're going to look to come up with our overall goals and our guidance. And think of this as a kind of facilitated conversation, but we really want to look at what the future of Treasure Island is over the next 20 years. Next slide. In this slide, we just have, again, a list of the topics that we'll cover: mixed-use development, stormwater management, sustainable future, resiliency, long-term infrastructure needs, including multi-use trails, beach renourishment, dune protection, fill of properties, redevelopment, connectivity, mobility options, and community recreation opportunities. Next slide. Okay, you've heard a lot from me so far, so let's get into the more interactive part. So I have come up with, for each of these topics, kind of like the good and bad, more of what kind of as a planner we would think of. This is kind of coming as a planning perspective. So think of it like that, because these different topics can mean different things to different people. And that's kind of what we wanted to get the conversation started, looking at it that way. So for example, so when you talk about mixed use and redevelopment as an issue, some may associate it only with density, but it doesn't always have to mean more density. You can have, it can be with different design elements, and different ways to redevelop that doesn't exactly mean density. And so some of the pros that we've kind of heard, through our careers, Joe and I, that mixed use and redevelopment can be good for economic development, and that could be a good thing. You can start to create a real sense of place by redeveloping with a theme in mind and kind of a plan in mind. You can create an environment there that people don't need to be as relying on cars as much, and that could also lead to a benefit of less parking is actually needed. And you can have opportunities to share parking between uses. And you also would have an opportunity to attract more dining and shopping and newer options for you. And also it could be an opportunity for an accessible housing, because mixed use is more smaller units, and not everybody wants to live in a big house anymore. So some potential cons are the effects to traffic and infrastructure could be impacted. Maybe incompatible with existing character, but that could just be an opinion, I think, more than a con. And just kind of how you lay it out and how you plan for it. Some of the community, the commercial areas, feel that newer development or redevelopment might price out some of the businesses, that the rents are going to go up, and that would be a negative thing. And then again, associating redevelopment and mixed use with density and losing your small town character. So next slide. So just quickly, these are some of the specific comments that we received during our visioning workshop with the residents. They said, improve facades of commercial corridor, walkability, cycling, safer streets, attract redevelopment, incentivize hotel modernization and redevelopment, protect the view corridors, taller buildings, maintain a 5-story height limit, too many condos, more green space, consider higher density in some locations, Gators was mentioned, new land use district for higher density development, revisit density height allowances for hotels, change community character, repurpose golf course, community character is old school, be like Reddington, walkability, require parking in the rear, and newer is more marketable. So that's just kind of, those two slides give you kind of a good background of kind of how we wanted to kind of phrase this discussion, and as well as what the residents were thinking. And now I'd like to, with this slide, I'm sorry, next slide. Now I'd like to open it up for discussion. These are think of these bullet points as kind of ways to think about this, just to get the discussion going. It's definitely not, the discussion's not limited to these bullet points at all. It was just kind of a starter for you. And also, if you feel that I've completely missed something really important, bring that up as well. And really what we want to do is get your feedback and comments in the direction. And we'll start with the first statement and then go ahead and open that up for discussion. So the first one is, goals for redevelopment could encourage Florida Green Building certification of silver level or higher. So this is kind of as sort of think about in a way to incentivize redevelopment, and that's kind of a tool that other cities have used, and just brought it to, you know, for your thoughts and reactions. Anybody want to go first?
Well, I'll be the first one to admit that I don't know anything about the Florida Green Building Certificate Program. So what can you tell us about that? If that's one of your main topics, and I've not heard about it, and I'm not afraid to say I don't know anything about it, because if I don't get knowledge, I can't make good decisions.
So it has to do with a newer, it's not really new, but a different way to build that is more sustainable. There's another organization called LEED. Maybe you've heard of that. That's a little bit more popular in the media, and it's a way to build for a greener building that doesn't use as much electricity and saves water. And so the certificate is it's left up to the developer to decide what things they want to do exactly to meet a certain level, and they get points for every green thing that they put into a building, and then in the end they start at silver. I think they start at just basic meeting meeting a LEED certificate, then silver, bronze, gold, and platinum. So there's different levels, and if you want to look at incentivizing greener development, that's a way to put it into your comp plan, and then eventually into your land development regulations.
So we'd have to actually require that developers meet a certain level to have an impact?
So to get an incentive, so yeah, that it's not a requirement, that is not typically.
I'm not sure I follow then what the incentive would be.
That's what you could come up with. It's a way to craft incentives that make sense to you. So an incentive would be maybe the developer doesn't have to meet all the parking requirements of his, and
density.
Yeah, something in the code that they could kind of do a little bit less, or maybe setbacks could be different, or height could be a little bit different, to something that would benefit them. They could get a better development, and so they give a little to the city, and you give a little to them.
Okay.
Hello.
I have an old-fashioned mic. Can you hear me now?
We just bought those, Heidi.
Well, that's why I can't operate them.
The mics aren't very loud in-house, but I
technology
think
of
they can
2020.
hear you online,
Okay.
I think. So just
So I appreciate the consultant giving us some ideas to start with, but I think we really have to consider in every decision we make the fact that we are dealing with a situation here where in 20 years, Treasure Island, whether we like it or not, is going to look a lot different. So I've been examining a Union of Concerned Scientists article from 2018, and also some commentary from financial leaders around the world about what this is going to do to our real estate market. And we all are sitting right here in a real estate bubble, everybody knows, and everybody's getting rich off Treasure Island, and we have plenty of people spending lots of money here. That's not always going to be the case. When we have sunny day flooding right now in Sunset Beach, does everybody know what that is? That means that we have flooding when it's absolutely sunny, and it's because of tides, tail conditions, or whatever. But basically, we really are in a situation where 20 years from now, we're going to look back on what we are doing today and say, did we plan for what we knew was coming? And 20 years is not a very long planning horizon. There's probably only one of us here in the room who's under 40. So that means all of us except you, Tyler.
Thanks for calling me out.
Really, Heidi?
Well, you got to speak up over there. He's going to get in a fight over something else. Whatever. So at any rate, I would like to see the number one goal, policy, and direction is to encourage sustainability in the context of this flooding that we're going to have. So if you're in the middle of Pinellas County, it's a great idea to have green LEED building certificates and so forth. But that is a very standard recommendation that would come from a consultant. And we're sitting here in Treasure Island, and we are not standard by any means. Back in
The next topic is resiliency, so that might be a better.
So I want to make sure that we think about that and everything. And so my suggestion here is that we incentivize for resiliency, to put it in your words.
Yeah.
And I'm totally on board with looking hard at transfer development rights and intensity density averaging, both of which are not currently in our land development regulations, and we wanted to put them in 2002, but the baby got thrown out with the bathwater when we had our height and density fight back in 2003, and those two extremely useful development tools got thrown out. And so we need to get those back in, and they don't have to be very scary. Doesn't mean you get all the density you want wherever you want. There's lots of ways to make limitations, but it does mean that you control or incentivize people to build in certain places. That makes sense. So I would like to see the TDRs and the intensity density averaging come back, which will help. The intensity density averaging will help a lot of our property owners that own property on either side of a street that are now treated as separate parcels, but they can't be considered as a whole. They can't move their density around their whole parcel across the street, let's put it that way. So with certain limitations, I think these tools are really missing from our toolbox. The one tool we do have, which we don't use a lot of, which I'm hoping we can use more of, is our developer agreements. We do have an ordinance for developer agreements, and they are, again, a mechanism for flexibility when we're looking at development approvals to do things just like the consultant suggested. Move the thing through faster if you comply with X, Y, and Z, those sort of incentives. So a great start on this page, but I just want to make sure that we're always talking about how much adaptation we're going to have to do versus mitigation as far as these resiliency issues. The more we promote it, incentivize it, the more we're going to see resilient structures that'll be here long after we're gone.
Thank you. Any other comments on the first one? And we kind of moved in a little bit into the second bullet. If we want to open this discussion for that transfer development right program.
Could we just go back to the Florida Green Building?
Yes. I didn't
did
do
that
it.
about 7 years ago. We really didn't get a lot of use of it. At the time it was increasing the construction cost 10%. Now I would only hazard a guess at 25 or 30% increase. We even adopted it for city facilities and had to back off of it because of some of the additional cost involved. I realize that it's a tool in the toolbox, but I'm not sure because of the cost of construction already with regards to beachfront property and Gulf Boulevard type properties, that it's something that a developer is really going to be able to utilize. I think, and you probably have already done this, I left for 10 years is my story. I left from 2009 to 2019 to a job on the East Coast. I was shocked when I came back to see the blighted properties, and I'll just call them that, on 107th and Gulf Boulevard. I'm certainly, and if you follow P&Z, you know I vote against every parking variance and against anything I consider to be an incompatible use with our neighborhood. So certainly not, as Amy said earlier, looking for a discussion on increased density or increased heights. But what's happened is the private property owners aren't moving forward with redeveloping those properties under the current codes. So something's broken. And I don't know what that is. I've only been back about 2 years now on P&Z for a little over a year, so I'm very much in a learning mode. But I know what we were able to do in terms of turning around a coastal community. And we did it through asking those property owners, what's wrong? Are we the problem? Are LDRs the problem? Are building staff the problem? And I think we've gone a long way in terms of fixing those time frames and those issues that we were hearing. You know, these questions need to be asked of those major property owners. What's holding you up? We took the bull by the horn, basically, and put together a grant program where we were providing 50% matches for specific property improvement grants. A lot of it was smaller, awning replacement, outside appearances. It had to be something that would impact that appearances. But, you know, if you look at Treasure Island, it's not the city that's not moving forward. I think the city is doing a terrific job on addressing your properties. And City Hall is a great example. Your new City Hall will show a reuse of that building. You're kind of leading the way in that sense, and addressing the master plan for parks, and addressing the master plan for what happens to these properties. But we cannot, I guess it's just having the new eyes, having been gone for 10 years and coming back, and seeing absolutely no movement within our main downtown area and Gulf Boulevard. Probably the only two new structures, and I understand there was, you know, obviously controversy on those were both the one new hotel on Gulf Boulevard and then the Fusion over here. But there's got to be something wrong when those properties, those private property owners are not moving forward. Whether it's an uncertainty in policies, whether it's uncertainty in terms of community reaction. But I think that's the gist of this page, and Heidi said it, all of these are tools in the toolbox. Maybe we need to ask the property owners, what is it in this toolbox, not impacting heights and not increasing densities in certain areas? What is it that we can do to get out of your way, basically, in terms of looking to redevelop? And I say a facelift. Redevelopment is a word that scares a lot of people. Economic development scares a lot of people, even though it's, you know, in a lot of areas. For us, maybe it's just a facelift. But that's just my visual in terms of coming back after being gone for 10 years. I didn't see too many changes except in terms of the city and the city moving forward. Stormwater, water, sewer, thank you. You guys are doing a good job in terms of updating the city. Now we need to ask the private sector, why aren't these properties moving? Why are they so quiet on our main streets?
Thank you. So actually, I've been a bad co-facilitator. I wanted to see if Joe Cordino had any thing to add to mixed use and redevelopment and that topic before we move on.
I don't have anything to add to that. I think the conversation is great, and we're getting good policy direction on these types of things. And so keep going, Scarlett.
Okay, thank you. Okay, it was briefly mentioned in the discussion a minute ago, the considering a transfer of development rights program with receiver sites are located where density makes sense. I think that was also, you mentioned density averaging.
I did have a question on that. I've done a lot of projects in the city of St. Petersburg that use TDRs, but in a built-out city such as Treasure Island, have you ever been able to instigate or put in place a TDR program? I mean, it'd be kind of hard in Treasure Island because there's not a whole lot of vacant land. I mean, it would be a situation where you start buying old houses
Or
in order to get
redevelopment.
higher density.
Or whole blocks.
Redevelopment type thing.
But that would be the only way to do it. And based on the current prices of houses on Sunset Beach in particular, I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of TDR use. But hey, I'm all for it. But you have done it in built-out cities before?
Isla Mirada down in the Keys, they have a system, and Key West, they're using it.
Well, the Keys are pretty unique. You buy two buildable
Very.
lots and build on one.
Very unique. It's a really fun learning process as a planner.
Could you explain transfer development rights a little bit? I think I generally understand the concept, but how would that apply here in Treasure Island? Like Richard's saying, how would we be able to utilize that in an
I might
example?
open that question up to Joe, if Joe, you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, so a transfer development right is, it's just like the name says, you've got development rights in, say, a certain geographic area, and the city feels that it would prefer that the development not happen there. Instead of denying those development rights and then potentially getting sued and losing a case when they obviously have rights, you can get them to kind of trade the rights and move them to a different location. So you would move the rights from one location A to location B, and allow the developer or the applicant to get those same rights there. And it just gets you off. It's a nice tool to accommodate the development community when you need to, and place that development where it's most appropriate.
Hey, Taylor, it was a great policy for establishing parkland, because we'd have developers that would buy vacant land, take the density, whatever the zoning allowed, and transfer it to their project. Say they were allowed 10 units per acre. And suddenly that piece of property now has 0 units per acre. So it's open area parkland for the rest of its life. So from that standpoint, in the city of St. Petersburg, where I used it, there was a lot of vacant land. Biggest problem we have here on Treasure Island is we don't have any vacant land to speak of that isn't spoken for. It would be a situation where you start buying, say, single-family houses and transferring that density to something higher. And while I'm all for the program, I just think it would have its limitations just because of the price of doing business these days.
So I appreciate your experience at the city of St. Petersburg's programs, but they vary widely depending on where you are. And here we have a lot of older motels that are not using all their units per acre, and they're also not using their floor area that they are allowed to build on those lots, because it's uneconomical to take down their current motel and build a new one and comply with all the rules. So essentially, we do have quite a bit of FAR that's out there that's not been built, which means intensity of buildings, floor area space. We also have quite a bit of density out there that is, older motel owners who are trying to make a decision, do I sell or do I rebuild? Most of them, as Pam pointed out in our downtown, the answer is, I don't do anything. And I don't do anything is the problem. And you have to create incentives with what you have. And if you look at Madeira Beach, you can see there's more intensity of development there. There's a lot built out on Madeira Beach. We are not built out here at all. And we also are going to need vacant land for stormwater, and for flooding and for beach, erosion and many other things. So I think we need to explore it. It's a good tool to have in the toolbox. And there's not just one TDR program out there. There are many different kinds.
Could the vacant land be utilized for parking? So say you have 2 older hotels across the street from each other, one on the beach side, one on the intercoastal side. Could you take the density from the intercoastal side, add it onto the beach one, and then use that property across the street just for parking?
Depending on what your parameters are, you have to put parameters. If you don't want that to happen, then you would have a parameter that says that's not going to happen. Or you can only.
That's just one example that
You
I'm
can only
thinking
transfer,
of that might be.
you can't transfer all the units, you can only transfer 10% of the units. They can't be within a mile of where the original density was located, for instance. So you have to put stops and backstops on some of these things because you don't want 25 units going in and making a 50-unit building. But if it makes more sense for them to have a 35-unit building instead of a 30-unit building, you would let them go across the street and grab those 5 units and put them on their structure. So you have the right idea, it's a lot more complicated than that.
So to understand it, that's then what happened with the club and the condos next to them? They transferred that density to the condos?
We don't have a TDR program now, so no. We don't have a transfer of development rights in our code now. This is something we'd be looking at.
So
I believe-
it would give us more flexibility.
Yes.
I believe what happened there was that was all one property at one time, and they took all of the density to build those 2 condos, and then they split off the part that the club is built on, and there wasn't any, the density was already used, but they split the property and sold that to the club or whoever.
It wasn't this, but that's kind of how
Similar.
it worked and how they ended up with the club with no density, is because they did that. Thank you.
I just want to make a comment. What you said, Heidi, earlier about resiliency and having that cross over all of these issues and be something, I mean, one thing that between all the members here today, there is some probably agreement on having resiliency really be an overriding marker for everything that goes into this plan. Because if we all can agree that we're going to be up against these climate changes, which we're already seeing, the rest of it won't make a difference. If I could second that, I guess is what I'm saying.
Absolutely. Any other comments on transfer development rights? Pam?
I would just echo Richard's point. I think it'll be very hard with our geographic area for anyone to agree where there's an area that would be appropriate for those increased densities. I also hear Heidi's point in that we do have a lot of the older properties that are sitting on some FARs and sitting on some density, but then you're transferring it from one property owner to another property owner, and maybe that gets back to some of the recommendations coming up on zones that might be more appropriate when you start looking at densities. But I don't know anybody in Treasure Island that I've met in the last 2 years being back that would agree that there's anywhere, where it would be appropriate for increased density. You'd be talking about something where property owners are on the west and the east side of Gulf Boulevard, and perhaps we wanted to continue to encourage lower heights on Gulf Boulevard, of course, but that means that we'd have to start talking about perhaps higher heights, on the east side of Gulf Boulevard. So it's a serious discussion that the city needs to have, but I'm not really sure that a TDR program is going to work in a city of our size where we're already built out. Yeah, cool. We'd be all interested in seeing what the in our own already us in that.
Okay, we're going to kind of move on here. So the next bullet is talking about architecture standards to kind of help. I use the word ensure, but that might be more like encourage. New development is in a scale and compatible with existing characters. Any thoughts on that statement?
I would be wondering about trying to put architectural standards into one person's like and dislike and taking away their ability to build a building, residential or building or a business, and taking away their right to express themselves in their building as long as it's built within our building codes. But the design of it, I don't know that the city should take away that right for individuality in design.
Right, I like the idea of some continuity, but maybe in city buildings or something like that, because you don't want everything looking exactly the same. And part of the uniqueness is the ability to drive down the street and see several different types of homes and structures. So, but I think that's a very subjective term. Compatibility.
I'd have to agree with that because we'd somehow suddenly look like, sorry Disney people, but we'd look like Disney West, you know, and we're unique and our community is unique. So if we start mandating any kind of architectural rules, for a better term, then we're going to lose some of that unique perspective and individuality of our community too.
Well, one of the processes that I've run into in the past is there was some pretty ugly architecture down in South Florida, and it became more of a situation where we'd like the buildings to look a little bit better. And that's what I've always been encouraging was, I don't want the typical box condo. I want to see the Don Cesar. And while you can't really legislate that, it would be nice to come up with something, for instance, like Collier County did and Lee County did, where they said, you know, you're not going to come in here and build boxes anymore. And they didn't say it had to be Mediterranean-style architecture. They didn't say it had to be Victorian-style architecture. They just said no boxes. And that's something that I think this city could really use, because some of the architectural styles are pretty bad. And it would just be nice to encourage the architects out there to become a little more creative. So I think that would be about as far as we could go with it.
I think the Fusion's done a good job of coming up with an interesting design coming in. And
Well, Mata does a interesting design, I must admit.
yeah.
I think it's a delicate balance because I think what we've heard from developers who have decided not to develop here is that we have a lot of restrictions, and that's been historically their overlying complaint. So although, you know, it is nice when we can kind of have some sort of architectural kind of lead into what we want, we also don't want to discourage people from coming in. Plus, at the end of the day, our opinion is one opinion based on what we know right now. It doesn't mean somebody couldn't come in with a fantastic plan that's outside of what we think's great, but we find it even better. That happens in art and creativity and architecture all the time. So although, you know, I think we have a lot more bigger fish to fry, frankly, than trying to increase architectural standards, just based on what developers have shared in the past.
I think it could be a tool, though, in the toolbox again on incentives. What we developed was a pattern book. We've got a convoluted mess right now, and you cannot drive the city and tell me what our design or pattern is. We don't have one. I can tell you what the two new buildings look like. They're kind of what, Richard, I think we'd say kind of South Beachy, you know, in the sense of coastal South Beachy. But a lot of the stuff that we're seeing coming through in P&Z, it's just a convoluted mess. It's pretty in the owner's eye or in the designer's eye, but I think you could use a pattern book where you could offer an incentive. Maybe that incentive is expedited permit or a percentage of a variance maybe that staff could approve that doesn't have to come through to P&Z or come through to the city commission. So I wouldn't throw it out. You know, I wouldn't mandate architectural standards. We're not Boca Raton. That's not going to happen. We're not Vero Beach. That's not going to happen. But I do think that it can be a valuable tool in terms, and I think all of these are really about incentives in terms of how we get those face lifts if someone can agree on at least 4 or 5 patterns, and I've seen the pattern books vary from Spanish, Moorish to modern coastal, all in the same pattern book, and that developer then can get that incentive. And I agree also when I heard over here with it being at least trying to find some consistency in style on new city projects. I think that's a good idea too. The city can be a leader there.
Just
Any
writing
other-
that down, thank you. Okay, our fourth one is create a new policy to address non-conforming use regulations in relationship to allowable densities and intensities. Sorry.
Could you expand on that a little bit? And
Give an example.
yeah.
Yes, probably for Treasure Island, the most likely candidate would be the hotels. So the existing hotels on the beach quite often have more units than they would be allowed if they redeveloped. So we consider them non-conforming. Other cities sometimes consider them grandfathered. And in those cases, they will allow a redevelopment of grandfathered density. So they say, okay, this was legally built, they legally had 30 units, and if they can, with the setbacks and the other rules that we have in place, whatever those become, you could still redevelop 30 units, even though the current code says you can only have 22, for instance. So that's probably the most Treasure Island-like example.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that expansion. That brings one to mind, Tyler. I mean, there's one hotel on the beach that we all know the owner of, Arthur's Design, and he makes a point of saying, I have a building where I have, and I don't know the exact number of units, but let's just say it's 30. I don't recall what it is, but if my hotel burned down, I could only build back 22. And he is very interested in coming up with some sort of incentive that if something ever did happen to his hotel, where he could build back a nice hotel but maintain his unit count. And I think for our existing hotel owners out there, that's very important.
Well, I think even not just if something tragic happened, but I think it would be worth a conversation of allowing those hotels to redevelop within the grandfathered amount of density just because they want to improve their property. That's what I've heard from a lot of residents, that they would like to be able to see that.
I've
How
heard the
does
same
that not
thing.
violate our height and density restriction?
I think what Scarlett had shared is they can do that without violating any other height and density requirements, correct?
Right,
Is that what
but
I heard
it
you
has to
say?
go to the voters, because it would be a density
But I
increase.
think it is important, and I've had several hotel owners reach out to me, Arthur being one, and other hotels saying if they want to update electrical or anything, even safety things. It's very difficult if they have to reduce their density because of the FEMA laws and things like that. And it is a concern. They buy a hotel with a certain amount of density, then they go to try to update or do any updating on some major components, and they run into that dilemma. And I think that goes to what we were talking about earlier. It's why people have done it, that have not done anything. I think it's really fair and would be onus to them for us to allow some sort of grandfathering in on the density they have and allow them to maintain that so they can update their buildings and possibly update some of their systems that they feel they need to.
Would that require a
just-
referendum?
So for notes on like the Page Terrace, it's currently 36 rooms, and if they were to renovate, it would be 21 if they were to demolish and be able to build back. One of the things
Is
that I
that
was
because of the parking would have to be?
just because of losing their grandfather status.
But, okay, but they could probably do it without raising the height of the building? It's not an issue.
No, if they knocked their building down, and built it according to our current codes with all the setbacks and density and height restrictions, they could only do 22 units on that piece of property due to the size of the property alone.
My other comment was going to be and I don't know if it applies, but Pam brings up a good point about like a 10-year look back, for the two big properties like the Treasure Island Hotel. And I don't know if it would fall within creating a new policy, but for like the Treasure Island Hotel, working with these licensing agreements, like I don't know if that falls into this specific category from a standpoint of, figuring out that space for these Gulf front properties may be something beneficial to a potential redevelopment. I know some of the current properties that are out there it's embarrassing what the space between the boardwalk and let's just call it their property line or their building setback is in present day. You take the Treasure Island Hotel and specifically they have this tiki hut. I mean, it's literally been sitting there for 6 or 7 months. I think something of a review situation would see is why is that not progressing, or what can we do to maybe help benefit whatever we're going to potentially input in the future, so we're not back in these types of scenarios. P&Z reviewed the Venetian Hotel in regards to a redevelopment project that got washed away, or I don't think it's happening anymore, but again, that feedback on why that developer's not doing that, I think would also be good for the consultant to have that type of information, so we know whatever we're going to try to implement in the future is applied. I mean, that's the Treasure Island Hotel, Tiki Hut, whatever you want to call it, that licensing agreement. That's a great example to review, and same thing with the Tahitian. Again, I don't know all the specific details, but those were redevelopment things that were taking place and just seem to be stalled right now. So.
Yeah, and that could certainly be another tool in the toolbox, would be incentivizing. So with the Tahitian, we were in negotiations for use of that space behind their hotel to build something like is being built at the Treasure Island Beach Resort, the Tiki Hut. And we were discussing a licensing fee for that. So a tool in the toolbox could be a lower licensing fee for that area if you've redeveloped your property or made certain level of improvements to your property. Then you get a lower rate on utilizing that property behind the hotel or something to encourage development.
Just an idea.
Yeah.
Which is then made up for, I mean, if we point it out on a grand scale, that money ends up coming back to us in reevaluation of appraisal property tax. So it's like a short-term loss, but a long-term gain. When we're looking at fiscal, that's what this is really all about, developing our city, keeping our resident taxes down, but doing it in a way that we're not honoring our residents' request to keep height and density the same, which is all this conversation is still keeping that relatively the same, or it is keeping it the same. Unit numbers and things like that can still be done within the height and density requirements. So I think that's what they've been asking for. I think that's what's been lacking, and I think that's a huge step in the right direction.
I have a question on the properties that you had referred to, some of the smaller hotels, just to talk about it. So if somebody goes from a 36 unit place and they're grandfathered in and they could build 36 units, is there current parking for under an old code for those units, or is there parking under the units that we have, or it's just mash together of
Well, there is no grandfather right now. That all of that would be answered in how the LDRs would be written.
No, I guess I'm just curious now. So you have a 36 unit place right now. Is there parking? It could be based on what the parking code was, or what the units were at the time, and
what the parking code was at the time, yeah.
Well,
and
most of
hypothetically,
the
what they'd end up
existing
doing is they would
hotels.
build like 2 or
Go
3
ahead,
stories
Lynn.
above parking. So right now it's a 1-story hotel, and the parking, all of a sudden the hotel might be 3 stories, and then all that ground floor becomes parking. So I think that's how it would look like applied.
the big issues. What were you saying, Richard?
Most of the hotels that are along Gulf Boulevard lost their parking requirements when Gulf Boulevard was widened from 2 lanes to 4 lanes. Like, I'm not going to sit down and try to analyze each hotel, but usually it's one space per room, and like a 36 unit hotel should have 36 spaces, and they might have had it prior to the widening of the road. They don't have it now.
Okay, that makes sense.
I think the commission is onto an idea there that I think the general public would understand that if that property has, let's say 36 units right now, that you're not increasing 30, by giving them 36 units. The leap will be, and you nailed it, Commissioner, that means that it's gonna be 4 stories, not 2. Now, we're not giving them a parking variance, the parking is gonna be underneath. And there's not anything we could do as a city to keep that building from having to go up simply because of the flood elevations that they're having to build to. I mean, that's just not something we're gonna be able to get around. So the building will have to go up, but it still would be in keeping with what the voters approved in terms of the height limits. But yes, that 2-story hotel right now is going to be a 4-story, but there will be parking available for that hotel underneath. And that's gonna be all about the community conversation and how it's presented and the visuals there. Yeah, we're not increasing density, but yeah, we're gonna have to increase that height. And I think you're gonna see farther up, there was quite a discussion, I came to both the visioning sessions on opening up the view corridors. When you do that again, you're not increasing the height limits that were improved at all. You're not going there, but you're at least, you gotta go up to be able to get the required parking.
And that also addresses Ms. Horrock's conversation earlier also with once they do that, it does create an area for water to flow. And there's another incentive there that meets our, another one of our bullet points. And again, not increasing height and density. It's exactly what the voters voted for, but allowing the hotels to be, to have financially make sense to improve their properties.
Is density only about parking?
No, it's units per acre.
Okay.
Yeah, that
Any
does
other
bring us,
feelings?
unless you guys want to talk more about the non-conforming regulations, but the last one, you segued into it really well, increasing the opportunity to minimize potential flooding because you're able to build to the right elevation, base elevation.
And that also gives us more FEMA credits because then we have more
Yes.
buildings FEMA compliant, and we need to remind our residents that's something that benefits all of us.
Goes back to resiliency again.
Correct. Yeah.
Well, I think just kind of putting a ribbon on the non-conforming use regulations. I know Ms. Horrock was concerned about, can we actually do something like that? I think tonight the objective is that something we would want to consider? And you can kind of get into the weeds and the actual rules down the road of how it can actually be done and if that would require. I don't think anyone here is ready for another referendum on that, and I think that's what our city manager was alluding to at the beginning of the meeting is we don't want to go there at this point. I think I'd probably speak for the rest of the commission when I say that. So is there something that we can do legally to allow that sort of a grandfathering program? Because it is something that our hotels have definitely said they would be very interested in.
Problems is that many of these tools are not in the current toolbox, and that hotel owner or many others would benefit from a lot of these other things that we're talking about, you know, including everything we discussed. So yes, has it been an impediment for them in the past? But if we had more tools in the toolbox, could we work with them? Absolutely, we could. You have to make sure that you're not going to trigger a referendum. That's going to be extremely tricky, but that's not to say that shouldn't be discussed.
Is there a monthly meeting with the city and like hoteliers or something like that?
I just
Is that,
had it this morning.
And is that just the mayor and the hoteliers?
Yeah.
And do you get good attendance from everybody that's on Gulf Boulevard of Treasure Island? Or 50%?
It could be better.
Okay.
This morning we had 6 hotel owners present.
Well, if you had something of news flash to them, maybe that would gauge more attendance from them. So, I mean, something has to be done. That's why we're here. So.
Anything else?
Thank you. Do you have any comments on the last bullet point, or should we move on to the next topic?
I just think that I know that we talked a lot about the hotel situation. I think also we need to focus on the commercial areas as well. There's a lot of space that's in Treasure Island that is either an empty lot or a commercial building that's not occupied. Currently, no national chains on Treasure Island, which is concerning. But those are 2 items that I think that are important. Rest in peace.
We have the Marriott.
Quick, and it probably gets to Heidi's point and Richard's point. Repetitive properties aren't eligible for acquisition through FEMA programs. And you can combine your stormwater grant, your stormwater dollars, with grants that are coming down. And if the property owners have to be willing sellers, and if we're going to address rising sea levels, some of those repetitive properties are going to have to be bought and left as green space. Helps everybody in terms of flood ratings, buys the property owner out, they get a good price, we get more green space. So it's just that point is huge in terms of utilizing that as a redevelopment opportunity and addressing the citizens' need and their request for more open space, more green space, and being resilient. But it's a long-term process, not easy. It can take up to 3 to 5 years to work through, obviously, the requirements. But it's very doable with willing sellers, single-family properties and smaller other commercial properties.
You're jumping ahead. We have that as a topic.
Just one final comment kind of off of what Ross said. I think it's in discussing the redevelopment item, it's important to remember a huge asset at the very north end of the island, the Gators property. And I know that our building department has a lot of knowledge and background on that property and the roadblocks that they've experienced to redeveloping that property. So I just encourage you all to take that into very close consideration when we're drafting everything, is kind of learning from those experiences. And while there may be a path forward for them right now, it's difficult. So if we can make it less difficult in the event that someone isn't willing to come in and go through the current process, in the meantime, if we can get to the end of this process and have that, if it's still available for redevelopment at that point, make it easier for them to do so. It's currently a hodgepodge of zoning. There's commercial general, there's resort high, there's residential, all within that area of the island. So if that can be addressed through this process, that would be a big win for the city, in my opinion.
Okay, I hope we started with the hardest one. So let's move on. I mean, we've really been talking about this the whole night, but the next topic, can I have the slide change? Next topic is resiliency and stormwater management. I think that I'm probably just, repeating what you guys already know with my pros and cons, but I'll just go through it quickly. Pros: protect property and values, create more green space. We've talked about that. Discounts on flood insurance, and less nuisance to deal with flooded streets. And cons: already mentioned, it's expensive and takes time. It can be very disruptive to residents and just to the community with the construction. Even the gentleman from Duke Energy was talking about the disruptive nature of of addressing resiliency with the power lines. So winners and losers, because Sometimes some are building up and the neighbors are not building up, and it can create runoff problems. And there's then that leads into the topic of fill for the island. So some feedback from the visioning workshop. The next slide. Some people don't want to elevate roads, but they want to capture stormwater and reuse it for community gardens. Permeable stormwater design in parking lots is a good idea. Support replacing aging infrastructure, definitely. There is pollution in the canals, and that should be dredged. Can the water flow in the canals be improved? Can there be nets installed at stormwater outfalls? Can electric utilities be undergrounded? Need storm drains cleaned out more often? Support raising the roads? Can the city create a program to encourage more homes to install French drains to capture more water? There needs to be more lighting in the neighborhoods, and some water pressure issues on Island of Palms. And can the city create a program to inspect the pipes on private property? So again, as before, those are just kind of some things to think about, and also you got direct feedback from the residents on this topic. And now we can kind of go into the discussion topics. One more slide. And again, the bullet points here, starting with create goals for designing based on a higher base flood elevation while continuing to maintain a pedestrian scale. So this leads to some of the, sometimes communities do elevate the homes, and it just kind of creates a big out of scale proportionally neighbor to neighbor, and there's ways to, if you can plan for it in the beginning, to kind of address that. So. Any thoughts on that?
Real quick, on the 14 bullets listed, like on what we heard, there's 14 bullets. If from the community, if one person puts that down, does that make this list, or does it have to be a multiple of 5 comments in the same category that makes this 14 bullets? How do these 14 bullets get determined?
So some of these are repeated several times, and we created a matrix, and we noted if it was said 2-3 times, but not all of them were repeats. So it is. I don't know. You didn't maybe attend the workshop, but what we did was we had everybody sit down at tables and just discussed, and all the comments that came out of those tabletop sessions were written down, and that's where we got the comments. Yes, sometimes, yes.
It could have.
Yeah.
Yeah. Could have.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that first bullet is kind of more of like an architectural type design comment. Does anybody feel that there would be against doing something like that? No?
I'm not sure I fully understand it. I think we have to abide by FEMA restrictions on how high, what the base flood elevation is. So how are you're saying could create disparities between property of property. So that's already happening now. I mean, you have properties that are 1 story next to properties that are elevated. So what is this bullet point trying to get at? Are we
Just
trying to
think of ways that we
prevent
could
that, or?
make it better, like more compatible, and kind of one thing that I notice in some cities that the door just seems so, like the front door just seems so out of place on a building that is elevated versus what you're kind of typically used to, or the windows are really in an odd place, and so it just visually, you kind of know it when you see it. It just kind of doesn't fit right, and there are ways to kind of address that, as if it's something that you want to. It's just this is all just
Okay,
food
so
for
this
thought.
is creating design goals for houses that are being elevated in order to maintain that kind of pedestrian walk up. So the houses that have the nice staircases up the front of them to a nice front door, that's what you'd be kind of looking for here.
Some people might not want people walking up to their front door.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think we need to leave that in the hands of the person spending the $1 million on the rebuild. So I'd like to stay away from that personally.
okay.
But that's just my opinion.
I mean, I think our building department is already
I
doing a
agree.
compatibility type of like review when it comes to like if it fits the neighborhood. The one thing that I would comment on this is I just don't want container homes built on stilts in our residential neighborhoods. That's the one thing that I just don't want shipping containers put on stilts and sitting in Treasure Island. So I don't know if that applies here, but that's my biggest thing.
And I would say this is not just residential, but if you think about downtown redevelopment, when we're talking about in our watershed master plan, raising infrastructure and raising roads and raising sidewalks, how does that work with the new buildings going in now? You know, how do we integrate that pedestrian experience as we slowly, over 20 years, start raising the rest of the infrastructure of Treasure Island?
Okay, that makes
I
more
mean,
sense.
Yeah.
That makes much
It
more
does.
sense.
I mean, from a downtown perspective,
Right.
I'm only speaking from my chair. I'll take anything in regards to development for downtown.
I'm thinking that you need to raise the pedestrian experience as well. If you're raising the roads, then your new level for pedestrian is the new road level. So, I don't know if you've ever experienced any of these towns where they sort of have, most of the pedestrian walkways are actually elevated. And, you just have like maybe an entry feature or an elevator or something underneath and the parking on the ground floor level. And then most of your pedestrian, in fact, we saw a downtown redevelopment plan not too long ago here that had elevated pedestrian walkways between, the commercial redevelopment. And to just, you know, I hate to say it, but, you know, we are going to be Venice someday. So you might as well start thinking in that direction. Are we gonna give our visitors a shopping experience where they have to keep walking down to areas that are going to be in the water? I mean, you're gonna have to elevate everything, including the pedestrian experience, you know, and we are already doing that with things like decks, you know, where you walk in a place, you might go up 2 or 3 stairs, and then you are seated on a deck. That's an elevated pedestrian experience. If you can walk from that business to the next business without going down back to the ground level again, that's an elevated pedestrian experience. So everything is gonna come up, everything.
How do you accomplish that logistically? Do you write into the plan that if if this building, if 100 redevelops theirs, if 102 redevelops, they have to make them connecting?
It's a really good question, and I think I've thought a lot about this with respect to downtown, and it dovetails into some of what Pam has said earlier, is that I think when you're talking about patterns and pattern books, when you're talking about downtown mixed-use redevelopment, that's where they can be super useful.
Right.
Because they would incentivize or otherwise suggest some of the things so that it would fit in with the next door neighbor. And there was another comment about where would you put additional density, or where you would put it in downtown. That's where it needs to be, in the middle. That's the highest, you know. And you are going to lose. You're going to lose some properties. There's just no question about it. But for a matter of, let's just say from the 20-year to 40-year planning horizon, your city center is going to be so much more important. Because the only way I'm going to be able to get to my house in 2060, half of the time is going to be over water. So do I want to bring my car in and maybe park in downtown, or have a parking condo downtown, or have a place I can land downtown and then go to my place, you know? So it does sound very futuristic. It does sound kind of wild, but while you're elevating roads, you're going to have to, like Catherine said, the pedestrian experience is going to have to be elevated. And if you can set out a plan that's like a jigsaw puzzle piece where people can say, I'll take 2 of those, 1 of those, and they'll all fit together. That's where like patterns and pattern books and architectural design standards really come in useful.
Even currently, Minneapolis has an is my walkway? currently, Minneapolis has an elevated walkway that goes between all of their shops and everything. Now, granted, it's to keep people out of snow, but it also has elevated levels where people can access the buildings, not on ground level, but they're elevated and covered. So, you know, we have our summer showers too, so having something like that that's protecting and above surface level would be probably wise planning for flooding and what we experience on the coastal areas.
I would think the pattern book, I don't mean to be regressing, but when you're talking about the downtown area and stuff, I could see where we would have for our commercial areas, having those maybe a little more restricted, for a lack of better words, for this redevelopment. If you want to go this way with the elevation, which I think that, I don't know that we want to, but we're going to have to do something for that. But you need to kind of keep that out of the private homes. So I think that we may need two distinct different items to do going there between the commercial properties and your private residences.
And one thing I wanted to mention, the state has preempted our ability to have design guidelines for single-family homes. So we really are talking about commercial and hotel and everything but single-family
Good to know.
as far as design guidelines.
Thanks for not letting us continue to speak about it,
Yeah.
considering it's irrelevant. And it's 9:30.
Okay, let's move on. The second one is revised standards for pervious areas. An example would be more semi-pervious pavers and other technology. And this is kind of an example of one that would really be a policy that would be implemented through the LDRs and zoning reviews. So that's just, talking about addressing flooding issues. This would be a very simple way to address that.
Sounds good. Any thoughts on that one?
Good idea.
That's a no-brainer.
Well, the one thing, Taylor, on that is, being as we're an island community, we don't have water quantity standards. We only have water treatment standards, where you got to treat the first inch of rainfall. And, it would help, let's face it, the two pervious areas that are currently on Treasure Island's parking lot number 2 and parking lot number 3 down on Sunset Beach. And while it was initially resisted by some of the residents down there, I think the end product turned out to be really a good-looking product. And so it's something that I think should be in the code, but a lot of the redevelopment's going to go on is, well, I don't have to provide stormwater attenuation anyway. I've only got to provide stormwater quality treatment. So the pervious areas will help, but they still have to treat the first inch or half inch of runoff or rainfall or runoff, depending on what definition you use. I'll give you a whole dissertation later on stormwater quality treatment required by Swift Mud. But anyway, bottom line is pervious areas like those two parking lots, numbers 2 and 3, turned out really well.
The third one, possibly create a goal to update shoreline and seawall development codes.
Well, the main thing there is one that we get into, and I know the city gets into a discussion about this, and it's the only major issue is the height of the seawalls. With the tidal rise, it's somewhat occurring. Everybody who's doing a redevelopment is raising their height of their seawall, and you get into the issue of how much fill can I bring into my property. And that's a major conflict in the city right now that I hope is working its way through the various reviews and codes.
I think that one kind of goes in line with our watershed management plan and our goal over the next 80 years to raise the roads, raise the seawalls, raise the properties in between. We're going to have those updates to the seawall development code to incentive or require people to elevate their seawalls. Would everyone agree?
Yeah. Yeah. We had extensive conversation about
Yeah.
it, so.
Well, and then that was addressing the seawalls, but it also has the shoreline, which I think trying to do what Stacy has brought forward for us, and we've already, the commission has already approved, like, you know, sometimes the living seawalls are more important than the concrete ones. So, you know, I think maybe if you were going to have an incentive, maybe you might want to do an incentive of people trying the living seawalls, maybe. I don't know, but that would, you know, for crossing different elements, for like on the matrix and
Right.
stuff, that might be something we might want to consider there also.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
So yeah, that also, both of you mentioned, we're going to be incorporating the watershed management plans and plan projects into the comprehensive plan, and so you'll see those as future projects. You'll see capital improvement projects and such, and you'll see policies addressing that watershed management plan as well. So I think that I don't think that there's anybody that would disagree with that. Okay. So that's just in there as kind of like, you know, just information, really, not necessarily a discussion point. Number 5, policies could promote sea level challenge vulnerability assessment and municipal seawall assessment.
Doing that? Yeah. Okay. Same way with the second one. Or the last one.
So that would just be kind of a type of report and an analysis, so that we could put policies in there that in the future we're going to do this. We're going to do the seawall challenge vulnerability assessment, and that's kind of what that's getting to. If that's, and again, if anybody doesn't agree with that, I think that.
Aren't we currently, or have planned from the city of inspecting the seawalls?
I thought we were doing that.
It's
already.
Yeah.
in our budget.
Yeah.
Yes, inspecting our city-owned seawalls, you mean? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's studies underway and replacement budgeted for over the next several years, planned for.
And the grant for the living seawall for Treasure Bay. I mean, yeah, Treasure Bay.
The Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council has been working on, like, trying to promote different living shoreline seawalls, and I think I forwarded their, or you probably have it maybe, where they kind of have outlined ordinances or ideas, and if not, I can send that on.
And then the final one, consider evaluating and updating the stormwater fees, but that could provide additional funding for the watershed management plan projects.
Reasonable?
What was that comment? Reasonable?
I just said that's very reasonable.
Okay, thank you. Okay, move on to our next topic.
So
Multi-use. Oh, sorry.
before we do that,
Oh,
so
I'm
we've
sorry.
covered 2 topics this evening,
Mhm.
and there's 3 more to go, right?
Correct.
And I consider the redevelopment one probably was the largest one, we're most time consuming we probably have in here. Is the goal to go through this whole packet over the 2 or 3 meetings that we have scheduled, or were we trying to get through this whole packet tonight?
This was prepared for tonight, not knowing, how much conversation we were going to get going. So we tried to get a lot in here. What we're trying to do for our next meeting, this is, subject to, we're flexible. So subject to your input of how you would like to see if you want to, what we wanted to do on the next meeting was take what we got tonight and bring back some kind of recommendations, really, of how, really more concrete, draft some policies and let you know ways that we could, really further take this to the next level as just examples, not like we're going to suggest this is the actual language, but it's just kind of just to give you kind of examples of how it's going to go, of how we can take what we got from you and address it. So that was kind of the plan for the next second bit. Joe, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Mayor. This is Joe Cordino. I don't think we're in any real particular hurry. I think we're going to be able to hit our deadlines quite well. We have a third workshop that was planned in February as well. And so if you guys want to kind of split this one in half and come back, I think it's the 1st of February and finish up, that's good. I know you've been working all night long, and this can get a little bit tedious, but it's important that everybody have a fresh brain when they think about this, so we come up with the best recommendations possible. So we're flexible. We can finish it up at the second workshop and then use the third one to present the recommendation.
Does that sound good to everyone?
Yes.
Since it's 9:40.
Oh my gosh.
Thank you.
I had the clock behind me. I didn't know.
Yeah. Time flies when you're having fun. I think that sounds like a good plan.
Yes.
Okay then, thank you very, very much. This was really excellent. I mean, I've worked on a lot of comprehensive plans in my career, and this is groundbreaking for me because I've never been in any meeting like this, and you guys were really great with really being open and great comments, and I took a lot of notes, and I think Joe is over there taking notes as well. So we documented everything as much as we could, and like we said, the next meeting is February 1st, and Joe will be attending on that meeting for you.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Scarlett. You've done a great job. We really appreciate you too.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So I do have to ask for any public comments since this is a public meeting. Hearing none. Thank you all very much for your time and look forward to seeing you all back on February 1st. And thank you again for engaging in this process with us.